O'clock, today's Talking Points with Laura Kuenssberg.
Good morning. Hard times, but we'll have some happy times here this morning too, I promise. Measly growth, spiralling prices for longer, and interest rates up again.
But let me be clear, inflation remains too high, and it's our job to get it all the way down to the 2% target and have it stay there.
So mortgage costs rise too, and there's a return of the 100% house loan.
£2 for a pound on your red grape, your green grape or your...
Recession's probably off the table, but making ends meet is tough.
People come in and sometimes they mention they only got so much to spend, so, you try and give them the best deal you can.
So we have one big question this morning. Will it be hard for the country to make a living for years to come? Sky-high gas and electricity prices are part of the problem. So the Energy Secretary, Grant Shapps, is here. What would Labour do differently? Jonathan Reynolds, its Shadow Business Secretary, joins us as well. But maybe the economy will be turned upside down by robots. Anyway, tech boss Emad Mostaque has stopped by.
I think this will be a bigger economic impact than the pandemic, and it's up to us to decide which direction.
And food prices are part of that pressure. The boss of the World Food Programme, Cindy McCain, is here on why it's a much bigger problem than just at our checkouts.
So we're asking everybody in the world to please take a look at this and please support us, because people are going to starve to death if we don't.
With us in the studio to talk about those pressures and a lot else too, the chef and founder of the restaurant chain Oaxaca, Thomasina Miers, on energy prices, the boss of Octopus Energy, Greg Jackson, is here, and scoop getter extraordinaire, The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crear, joins us as well. Morning, and if you are a bit bleary-eyed after Eurovision, you are not alone. And we had our own secret reporter there for us as well, who will show us what was really going on behind the scenes.
Laura, it is Catherine Tate here. I've just finished giving the scores. I don't even know if you can hear me, or indeed if my dress would be suitable for Sunday morning viewing.
I think Catherine Tate is appropriate for any time of the day or week. A very warm welcome to you three. Let's first take you to a look at the front pages. Eurovision is, of course, on there with the Princess of Wales, piano solo during the titles. The Sunday Times has a story about the ongoing nurses' strike. And the Sunday Telegraph says that Labour would give EU citizens a vote in a general election. We'll talk about that later. The Sunday Express, there's some Tory jitters around, says the Prime Minister will not budge. And the Observer says that there is some kind of Conservative revolt going on. Let's get straight into that. Pippa, what's really going on in the Tory party? We're seeing all sorts of jitters, aren't we?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right word. We kind of forgot about it last weekend because of the coronation, but the local elections happened just a couple of days before and were really bad for the Conservatives. They performed worse than their worst expectations, and Labour conversely did much better. And because of all the pomp and ceremony over the weekend, it sort of became secondary news. But when MPs came back to Westminster on Monday, and all through the week, there's been an awful lot of anxiety about what that means for the future of the party. And there have been a couple of moments where it's kind of erupted. We saw that with the EU retained law bill earlier this week, which a lot of Conservative MPs on the right of the party were upset about the government.
Not getting rid of Brexit legislation.
And not getting rid of as much as of Brexit legislation by the deadline that Rishi Sunak had made a big thing of setting out over the summer leadership campaign. And then we saw that over the weekend with a meeting of a new group called the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which insists it's about restoring power to the party grassroots, but also there's this bit about, do we want to restore Boris Johnson to office? And they met at the weekend, and some quite senior Conservatives like Priti Patel and Nadine Dorries really showed us how unhappy some people in the party are about the lack of what they see as Rishi Sunak's own mandate when it comes to the Tory leadership.
And there are also, Greg and Thomasina, sort of jitters generally about some of what the government's doing on something that traditionally should be very safe ground for a Conservative government, how to get business going, how to get growth in the economy. I mean, Thomasina, you know, you run a big restaurant company, huge pressures on the economy at the moment, but what is it like trying to run a business at the moment?
Well, the main thing is staff, and, you know, we don't take food seriously, and we are completely shortage, the whole industry, by lack of cooks. And that we see, again, I'm a trustee of chefs in schools, our biggest threat to growing is a lack of cooks. And if we're going to treat public health seriously, and business, and this amazing kind of hospitality industry that puts so much money in the Exchequer's coffers from the amount it generates, we need to invest in training of our own people. If we're not going to, because so many people went home, both after Brexit and after COVID, massive people going back to Europe who took the hospitality industry seriously and really invested in it.
So the labour shortage is being felt, it's very real for you. Greg, what about your sector? Because, you know, the UK's been quite good at renewable energy in recent years, but there have been a lot of warnings recently that that status is a bit shaky now, and actually lots of projects are being held up.
Yeah, I think, look, first of all, the UK can be proud that you know, with maybe 40 to 50% of our electricity coming from renewables, we've been a world leader. And nothing's brought this into sharper focus than the energy crisis. It was a gas crisis. And, you know, if we'd had more homegrown renewable energy, we'd have been better insulated against the crisis. So I think it's, you know, very positive that energy is now front and centre of national debate. And the question is how we can transform a 150-year-old system in the next decade and a half to bring cheaper energy for households, for businesses, critically needing it, and of course, you know, cleaner energy, and finally, national security.
OK, well, all three of you, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's get on with the programme, because as Pippa was saying, there have been some bad Tory tempers this week, and of course, another interest rate rise. And look, the Prime Minister even had to suffer watching his team, Southampton, get relegated in the football yesterday when he was watching them at St Mary's as they lost to Fulham's. So maybe a tricky few days for the Prime Minister. But Grant Shapps, the Energy Secretary, is on the pitch for the government this morning. Welcome to you, Mr Shapps. Now, there have been quite a lot of jitters for the Conservatives in the last few days, and repeatedly, ministers sit in that chair and say, judge us on our 5 promises. So before we get into our conversation, I wanted to just bring viewers up to date with some of those promises. Now, you said you'd have inflation. The Bank of England said this week it's going to come down more slowly than expected. You said you'd grow the economy. It shrank by 0.3% in March and grew by only 0.1% in the first 3 months of this year. NHS waiting lists are at record levels, higher than they've ever been since records began. And the Prime Minister always says he wants to stop the boats, but 564 people came here crossing the Channel just last week. So can you be straight with our viewers this morning and say keeping these pledges is harder than you thought it would be?
Well, first of all, we're still... Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, we're still absolutely committed to that set of 5 pledges. As you say, we want to halve inflation, and you're right that the bank have indicated that this is happening a bit slower than they would have liked. They're responsible for interest rates, but they're still saying it's going to happen. We want to grow the economy, and actually, against what the bank and the Office of Budget Responsibility had said, we thought we'd be into a shallow recession. In fact, the economy is growing, albeit slowly, so there is some movement there. And of course, we want to reduce debt and make sure we do get the NHS waiting lists down, and we put huge resources into that. So we've seen an end of 18-month waits, for example, I believe. And you know, when it comes to stopping the boats, we're passing the laws to do it. We're working with different countries like Albania to make that happen. And I should point out all the time, particularly with stopping the boats, against the opposition who vote against the laws that enable this to happen.
But the point I'm putting to you this morning is actually the promises that Rishi Sunak set out at the beginning of the year are proving rather hard to keep. And some people in your party in the last few days have openly shown their frustration that he isn't being bolder, that he isn't trying to go further, and really aren't convinced that he's going to be able to keep the promises he's already made.
So, I mean, look, first of all, I accept that they are difficult and very detailed pledges. These are not vague numbers that we've put numbers to what we've promised. It's difficult. Secondly, I thought it was always going to be difficult, and we still are committed absolutely to those 5 pledges. And our message, and my message is simple this morning to your viewers, is the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, set out his 5 pledges to, as you said, halve inflation and grow the economy. And
we've been through them. We don't
I won't
need to
repeat
hear them
all for
again.
And he is still absolutely, and we are still absolutely committed to delivering those things, all of them, including the NHS waiting lists, including stopping the boats.
But he's not achieving them.
Well,
and the point is that he promised, here are my vows and I will deliver them. And on the current trajectory, it just doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Well, my argument is wait till the end of that trajectory. He said he'd do them during this Parliament, actually on things like growing the economy, and I accept this is not sort of runaway growth or anything, but actually we've avoided the recession that even the experts were projecting and predicting. So actually there is some success in there already.
You're not going to tell our viewers
but we've got a lot. No, of course not. But his pledge was to grow the economy, and we're starting to see it grow. And of course, in the next 18 months, we want to see that growth picking up, which is why it's very important we stick with the course.
But the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, says that Rishi Sunak is overseeing the managed decline of the Tory party. There are many people in the Conservatives' ranks who are deeply worried. They've even been holding conferences, holding public meetings. This is now way beyond sort of Westminster whispers. There was a big conference yesterday in Bournemouth. There's another coming this week. And all the time, there's Boris Johnson looming over it. There they are yesterday, people clapping the prospect of him coming back to save you from what Priti Patel says is Rishi Sunak's managed decline. Now, if everything's okay, what are they all on about?
Yeah, look, I don't buy that version of events. I think this is a party that still, after years in government, and despite having to put up with things like, you know, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and all the costs attached to it, is actually buzzing with ideas.
Really?
And we're able to get together, and we're able to hold conferences and have different ideas come forward, just as happened when I was reselected recently to fight my own seat as the candidate.
So you welcome all of this, then? You welcome former cabinet ministers saying that people in the party have damaged it more than Labour. You welcome former cabinet ministers saying the party's in managed decline.
Well, I don't have to agree with everything that everybody says to welcome the very fundamental fact that we're still the party coming up with new ideas, with a vision for the United Kingdom, and I think that is a good thing. And you know, the fact that Boris Johnson, who was our Prime Minister, is clapped by Conservative MPs, I served in his cabinet, is not, I think, a shocking revelation that you seem to suggest it might be.
What's interesting, though, and we heard it from the Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, here last week, and I think we're hearing it from you again this morning, is your party got an absolute kicking from the country in a set of elections last week, losing more than 1,000 seats. And essentially, you're saying, stay the course, don't change anything, carry on as we are, business as usual.
That's not quite right. And
so what are you changing then?
First of all, you're right, this was a disappointing set of elections for us, clearly. On the other hand, it was the first opportunity that people have had since all the shenanigans of last summer to go to the polls and put their X in a ballot box and, you know, in a sense, express their displeasure with what had happened. Imagine if that set of elections, by the way, had been 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago. They would have been clearly
But my question is, are you going to change anything since then? It doesn't sound like you are from what you've said so far this morning.
I think what we're going to do is deliver specifically actually on the 5 pledges, which I will resist naming again, just not to try your patience. But that's what we're going to do. And actually, when you think about the priorities in this country, you know, these are the things, stopping the boats and, you know, getting on top of the NHS waiting list are the priorities. When I knock on doors in my constituency and elsewhere, that is what people want to see us do.
Okay.
So no, we're not going to be diverted from those principles,
okay.
No.
Let's talk about your job as Energy Secretary then, because one of people's priorities is also being able to pay their energy bills. Now, the government has been paying half the nation's energy bills all winter, but was March's payment the last time that will ever happen?
So, I mean, first of all, you're right, we've been paying typically half of the energy bill for a household and even for a business. The problem is it hasn't felt that way. People will be watching this and saying, right, you didn't pay half of my bill. That is because the bills would have gone up so much more had it not been for that support. There is still safeguards. There are still safeguards in place, including the energy price guarantee. But critically, what we're starting to see, or have seen on the wholesale price, those energy prices falling below that cap and getting back to more like what will be normal prices. Now, people haven't seen all that benefit, or much of it, or even any of it yet, In about another 6 weeks this summer, that should start to feed into people's electricity.
But you say they should be normal,
bills.
and actually what experts calculate is that they will still be 50% higher than 2 years ago. Now that's not normal, unless what you're saying to people is that is a new normal, and actually we have to accept now that the price of energy, the price of basics is just going to be higher for longer. That's what we have to accept.
Look, I can't accurately predict exactly where the energy price will be, but what I can tell you is that at its height, it was about 600 pence per therm for gas. I just looked this morning, it's 76 pence per therm. So we will see the energy prices falling. And there's something else the government can do here, which is my objective, is to create the sort of energy security that we found didn't exist when Putin invaded and used energy as a weapon of war, as a weapon of blackmail, essentially, to get us to the cheapest electricity wholesale prices in Europe. And that's where I want to take the United Kingdom through our incredible programme of renewables and rebuilding nuclear
power.
And
a lot of people in that industry have been talking about putting your foot down on that for a very, very long time. One solution energy firms have been calling for is a so-called social tariff, accepting that there will be people who are always going to struggle. Would you consider a social tariff for energy?
Yeah, so the Chancellor actually already announced that we would look at that, and of course we've always had, we've always had the Warms Home discount. We're already doing it. That essentially provides something of support for people. But I was going to just commenting actually on what the Chief Executive of Octopus was saying. People don't realise in this country how far we've gone with renewables. Back in 2010, when this Conservative government came to power, only about 7% of our power was renewable. This last 12 months, if you take renewable and nuclear, about 57% of our power came from renewables and nuclear. This is a transition which gives us, Britain, the biggest offshore wind farm in the world, and the second, and the third, and we're building the fourth. We're doing very well on those things. What I need to see is that come through to mean that people's energy prices are cheaper and stop us having this reliance on the international gas market.
But let's look at what's happened more recently than that, because actually in the last 6 months, only one wind turbine has been started. In 2022, only 2 onshore wind turbines were started in England. So there had been huge progress, but it's slowed right down. And you've heard Greg say there, actually, there's a danger renewables are going backwards on your watch.
Yeah, I think that would be wind farms rather than individual turbines. But I can tell you that not only do we have, I think, about 14 gigawatts, this may not mean a huge amount in numbers of wind turbines onshore, we also have more, for example, solar in the United Kingdom than France, even though the country is geographically half the space and our weather isn't quite as good. So we do very well, actually, on onshore wind farms, on solar, on offshore.
But the recent numbers are amazing. I just want to bring Greg in here. I mean, Greg, how easy is it right now to get things done, to get diggers in the ground and to get things built?
I think, first of all, Grant's right. The UK can be proud of where we are. That means that we've now got the hard task of moving from a position where renewables are a minority of energy to the bit where they become the norm. And to do that, we need to unleash, tens of billions of dollars of investment we have available to build new generation. But we need the grid connections and we need the planning permission. By the way, Germany did something kind of remarkable, but also kind of challenging, which is during the gas crisis, they built 5 liquid natural gas terminals. And Germany has the same sort of bureaucratic planning constraints we have. But I think they treated it as a national emergency. And in the same way that in the pandemic, we took a 15-year vaccine process, did it in a year, we need to do the same now building renewables.
Well, what do you say to that? It's plainly saying if this is a crisis, which everyone agrees it is, you have to get on with it. You've got to accelerate it.
Because we already had those gas terminals, we didn't have to build them, and we already have a much bigger mix of renewable.
Germany managed to build hundreds, and we've built 1.
But Germany was nearly 50% reliant on gas from Russia. We were 4% reliant on gas from Russia. So we had a very different energy mix. And we do, as Greg says, we do very well with our renewable, in fact, entirely world leading. When I go to the G7, for example, of energy ministers, the rest of the G7 looks to Britain for its record on renewables.
But that's the record. This is about what's next. And Greg's clearly saying to you, we've got the funds, we're ready to go, but we need planning to open up, and we need the grid connections. And these are things that are in your interest as Energy Secretary.
And that is absolutely right. So to put this into perspective, we need to build in terms of connections to our grid in the next 6, 7, 8 years. as much as we've done for the last 3 decades. So there's a massive challenge. We're almost a victim of our own success in having added so much energy to our grid that we now have this massive challenge. So I've got some very authoritative work going on this. We're making legislative changes right now. I have a report coming onto my desk in the next month on the subject, what else we can do to speed up the grid. But that is our biggest challenge. Every country is going to face it. We're ahead of the game because of the level of renewables that we've got coming into our system right now. And by the way, this government's reinvesting in nuclear. I was the first energy secretary for nearly 40 years to put money into nuclear power down at Sizewell C. Every single nuclear reactor that runs today, bringing us the power that we need to rely on, was commissioned under the Conservatives, and we're back to making sure that we bring in more nuclear power. I want that to be about a quarter of the power that we have, because it's very important we have that reliable energy, so we can't be held to ransom by a Putin or tyrant in the future.
Okay, and there have been lots of delays in the nuclear industry too, but it sounds like you want to change
so
that.
I've set up
Grant
Great
Shapps,
British Nuclear.
thank you very much indeed for coming here, and when that report on the National Grid lands on your desk, maybe you'll come back and tell us about that then. Thank you for coming in. Now, if you want to share what you thought of what Grant Shapps had to say to us, by all means, please do. You know, you can always email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or use the hashtag BBC Laura K. Now, I'm sure Grant Shapps doesn't want to be replaced by Labour, and let alone a robot. But if you've been paying attention on Sunday mornings, I know you all do, we've been talking a lot about changes that might come from artificial intelligence, as computers can behave increasingly like humans and can do things without us tapping instructions on a keyboard. Now, one of the most important people you might never have heard of is Emad Mostaque, the founder of Stability AI, one of the leading firms that's British in the field. And he stopped by the studio for a visit, and we talked about what AI might really do.
So what artificial intelligence could do was there's this concept of big data. And so it took all your data and then largely was used to serve you ads. This is a new generation of artificial intelligence called generative AI. And the best way to think about it is really talented graduates that occasionally turn a bit funny. So they can paint, they can draw. Half of all code now generated is AI generated. And they understand concepts. And this was the missing part from the logical big data rational part, this new principle-based analysis. And again, when you use this for writing text, for generating images, audio, it feels very human.
So let's talk about some of the things that it can do. And I know when you're trying to explain people, sometimes you use images of a labradoodle. So why not? Let's show them to the audience if we can. What do these images show, right? Because they're not real, are they?
They're not real. So this is one of the models we created called Stable Diffusion. It drove a lot of those avatar apps that you kind of saw. So you would say, I want an image of a labradoodle with a hat saying happy birthday on it, with balloons in the background. And so what we did is we took 100,000 gigabytes of images, 2 billion, and then a supercomputer 10 times faster than the fastest supercomputer in the UK, and squished it all down into a tiny file that fits on your smartphone, that understands all these concepts. So you could say balloons, things like that. And the next step of this, you can say, make it shaggier. You can say, put it in a stained glass window. You know, add a cat as a friend. It understands all these concepts in just a few gigabytes.
We asked, as you might imagine, also to create a female presenter of a current affairs show, and we can show people what it came up with. I mean, I suppose it's fun to think about these sorts of images being created, and you can put something into a computer and it gives you something that's sort of entertaining and creative in that way. But a lot of people think about AI and suggest that actually it might lose lots and lots and lots of people, might lose their jobs because of it. I mean, you know, she might replace me in a few years, but this is serious, isn't it?
I think it's serious, and this is a question that's occurred with every single technological advancement. Like, you can take amazing photos on your Google Pixel or iPhone, but there's still more photographers employed now than ever. I think what happens is that a lot of tasks become easier because the easiest thing for us to do as humans is talk like we are now. Writing is harder, especially writing concisely, really hard. Generating images is the hardest of all, and that's PowerPoints, that's image generation, and then video. Like, there's a whole crew of experts here. But we face a lot of frustration in our jobs when we're trying to convey concepts, when we're trying to talk and tell stories. And I think this reduces the bar for that, so we can tell better stories and become more productive. But we have to be careful and move fast.
Well, the chief scientific advisor, actually, who's just stepped down, Sir Patrick Vallance, I mean, he suggested that the impact on jobs could be as big as the Industrial Revolution. That kind of scale of change. Is that right?
I think this will be a bigger economic impact than the pandemic, and it's up to us to decide which direction, because so much of our world is about knowledge work, telling stories. All of finance is just basically stories. And these allow us to tell better stories and absorb stories better. Right now, we're having this discussion and people are listening to it on TV. What if your Siri or your personal assistant could automatically log that, have it relevant to wherever you are? You're an accountant, you know, you work in a hairdresser, and capture that information seamlessly. That's where we're moving to. And again, the impact is an army of really talented grads that will become increasingly specialized at your fingertips.
But to a lot of people, it might sound frightening. You know, that pace of economic change, you're suggesting something that could be as hit to the economy as big as the pandemic.
Yes, and it could be for the positive as well as the negative. So on the one hand, you had a report coming out by OpenAI and other academic researchers that said up to 44% of tasks could be affected because they become incredibly easy. But on the other hand, you have Goldman Sachs saying it could add 6-7% to GDP. Why? Because you can do more. Everyone can do more. They keep their jobs, but they do their jobs better, and it creates abundance.
It does, though, present some other challenges. And you were one of the people who was a signatory to a letter that we talked about on this programme, actually, about the threats of the most advanced the most advanced type of artificial intelligence sort of spiralling out of control. Now, you said that it could be an existential threat. What do you mean by that?
So the origin of this is labs such as DeepMind, which is owned by Google, and OpenAI, which is funded by Microsoft, were trying to build artificial general intelligence, an AI that could do everything. And that's kind of scary, because what if it can do things better than us? If you have a more capable thing than you, what is democracy in that kind of environment? This is a known unknown, because we can't conceive of something more capable than us, but we all know people more capable than us. So my personal belief is it'll be like that movie Her with Scarlett Johansson and Joaquin Phoenix. Humans are a bit boring, and it'll be like goodbye, you know, you're kind of boring. But I could be wrong. If we have agents more capable than us that we cannot control, that are going across the internet and hooked up, and they achieve a level of automation, what does that mean?
And what could that mean in the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario is that it proliferates and basically it controls humanity, because you can have 1 million of these things replicating effectively. But we don't know, and those are the worst things, because when you're dealing with uncertainty, you have to minimize for maximum regret, and you have to take care, and we've not seen technologies like this that can proliferate so quickly.
But if you are, and you have made that decision to have your technology open, to use open source, to use the jargon, but if it is all open, isn't there a risk, therefore, that it actually could fall into the wrong hands? Isn't it more dangerous to have it all out there?
By having it open, it means that it's battle tested and stress tested, and so we've seen loads of people doing research around how can we improve data sets, how can we build detectors. Whereas on the other hand, you have these other technologies, complete black boxes that you don't know what happens. That technology itself can be replicated by bad actors, or it can just be stolen by bad actors. The operational security is poor, and these are just, they fit on a thumb drive.
Right now, there are 2 companies in the world that can produce the most advanced level of artificial intelligence where there could be very serious threats. You're saying that within 12 months, that could be everywhere, and it could be in the hands of people who wish to do the West harm.
It could be a dozen, 2 dozen, yes. And so we need to have some international standards around this, and we need to help, because a lot of the things around the unpredictability of this is on the outputs. One of the things I think we should implement in the next 6 to 12 months is don't use the whole internet crawled. Use national data sets that are highly curated and reflect the diversity of humanity, as opposed to the Western internet as we see it. And these models are more likely to be stable. They're more likely to be aligned with humans.
You say it's urgent, and you've made that very clear, but do you think that governments are moving fast enough?
For me, this is like COVID before Tom Hanks. And then Tom Hanks just changed it to, we need policy now. I think something will come in the coming months. I'm not sure what that will be, but I know by next year this technology is everywhere. It's in our phones, it's in our workplaces, and it's moving the nature of society.
What could that kind of moment be, though? So you say when Tom Hanks caught COVID, suddenly it was real for everyone, and suddenly it was here. And you say there will be some kind of moment like that for AI. But what kind of thing could it be, do you think?
So like last week, the Republican Party had an AI-generated attack ad against President Biden.
This just in, we can now call the 2024 presidential race for Joe Biden.
And that is something that governments have to respond to.
Does it worry you, though, that in America we're seeing political parties starting to use AI?
Yes, it does. And again, I think it's an inevitability. Again, this technology was advancing anyway. The question is, can we standardize it? And this is why I wanted to put a real focus on the training data.
The material that's being put into these supercomputers.
Rubbish in, rubbish out. Because at the moment they are training on the whole internet for good and bad. That's why you've got these weird edge cases. It's why you've got, again, you put that presenter in, by default she is white, you know? But again, that shouldn't be the case for Japan. That shouldn't be the case for India. They should have data sets reflective of their own nations, or even Britain.
When you make something, traditionally, it is your property, whether it is a song, a painting, a photograph, and your company is being sued by the photo agency Getty, a huge company, and it's claiming that you've infringed on its photography rights because you scraped stuff off the internet, put it into your computer, and out comes something else. Do people have the right to seek redress if these models are using what is theirs?
Well, I think that's an interesting thing, because what if you have a robot that's walking around and looking at things? Like, do you have to close its eyes if it sees anything? And what is the nature of these models? Because it's an input question and an output question.
Do you think that the government's aim of the UK being an AI superpower, and you know they've put £900 million recently into this, is it realistic?
I think it is realistic. I think the government is showing a remarkable level of progression versus, you know, regulation first EU on that. Mm-hmm. And you've got ourselves and DeepMind. You have amazing AI talent in London and hopefully moving across the UK.
Can we trust you?
I think everything is open, right? I think there shouldn't have to be a need for trust if you build open models and you do it in the open, and you should be criticised if you do things wrong and hopefully lauded if you do some things right.
And just lastly, in 10 years' time, will we look back and think whether it was ChatGPT or Stability AI or DeepMind, will they be as big in our lives as the Google, the Facebook?
They'll be bigger.
Bigger?
The entire of humanity are the stories that make us up and the stories we tell each other. And now we can tell better stories and understand better stories. This is why I think Patrick Vallance is right, it is bigger than the Industrial Revolution. And it's up to us to decide, do we want a repeat of Web 2, where it was centralized AI and we had few options, or do we want to have AI that is representative and owned by us? And I think it'll be a mixture of the two, and I hope to help with the latter.
Emad Mostaque, thank you so much indeed for coming to talk to us. It's been a fascinating conversation.
My pleasure.
Thank you. The very certainly not boring Emad Mostaque on what might be coming from artificial intelligence. Well, let's talk about that with our panel, Thomasina, Miers, Greg Jackson and Pippa Crear. Now, Thomasina, this threat and opportunity from artificial intelligence is already starting to have an impact in business. I think we've found some pictures of a restaurant in Japan where robots are already serving people. Can you see sometime soon in your businesses this actually playing a role?
Well, I mean, we've always, Wacker loved tech and embraced it. And I think things like paying bills, there's nothing more frustrating than waiting to pay a bill. Once you've eaten, you want to just leave. So stuff like that is great. It's interesting. Things like cooking, it's very physical, it's very tangible. And particularly when you look at healthy foods, good cooking, what makes us well, I still think there's a really human role in that. And actually that's what I really love about my job. It is so physical and it's in a way completely cut off from tech and the web. There's something wonderful about that and kind of wholesome. The route to kind of happiness is to kind of break and share bread. So it's interesting. I think on some sides it will be really, really pivotal, but the actual art and craft of cooking, I'm wondering how much.
So that sort of human contact, I mean, it was interesting, you know, when we were talking to him, Greg, he was talking about, you know, humans can do more of the really, really human stuff and machines will be able to do more of the more boring stuff. But that does have a huge risk to jobs, right? And in your own company, you're already using AI, I think, to answer customer emails?
That's right, yeah. I mean, first of all, we should say our company is very fast growing, and so we created 5,000 jobs over the last few years. But during the energy crisis, we've had to really increase the amount of time and effort we spend talking to customers to help them through. And one way we've done that is augmenting our team with AI. And it's the equivalent of 250 people's worth of work it's doing at the moment, answering emails. And the interesting thing is that emails that are kind of broadly written by the AI achieve a higher satisfaction rating than ones written by humans already. And by the way, 6 weeks ago, we weren't doing any of this. So it's now 34% of all our emails in 6 weeks.
So in 6 weeks, you've now got machines, computers doing the work of the equivalent of 250 people, and your customers enjoy getting an email from a machine more than they did from your customer service representatives.
That's right, and I think governments need to understand the pace at which this economic dislocation could occur. Like in the long run, new technologies have tended to improve the economy, but for short-term effect, or for certain groups of people, it can be really destructive. And given the pace of AI, we need to get onto this now. Also, you know, look, there are a couple of other threats, right? AI getting in the hands of bad guys. You know, if it can write great emails for us, it can do some very bad things for bad people.
And just briefly, Greg, I want to just get a quick reaction to you from what Grant Shapps was saying about energy. So there are clearly challenges there, and he was sort of trying to say we're well ahead, but we've double-checked the figures, and Renewables UK said there was one project in 2022 doing onshore wind in England with 2 turbines. That sounds like all that progress might be thrown away.
And that's onshore. Now, by the way, you know, 80%, 90% of people want onshore wind, particularly if it can drive down energy costs. And you know, we've got products where if people live near a turbine, when it's windy, they get cheaper energy. That's the way we need to reimagine energy so that people benefit from this renewable revolution. And right now, you know, we have to get on with it because it'll drive prices down for homes, for businesses, and of course, the UK's got a chance to be creating this entirely new industry. It's not just AI, but clean energy is going to be huge.
Okay, well, let's talk a bit about food prices, because that's such a big part of inflation. And this week we were lucky enough to talk to Cindy McCain. Now, rocketing food prices are a huge reason why we're feeling poorer in this country. And this week the government's going to have the food businesses in, talk to them about what's going on. But the impact, of course, isn't just here, it's right around the world. Now, Cindy McCain, you'll know from having been married to the late politician John McCain. He was a huge politician for many years in the US. But she's now the new boss of the United Nations World Food Programme. And we were able to speak to her from Nairobi a few days ago.
Let's start with climate change affecting the entire world. And so that's number one. Conflict has increased. The cost of food, as you just mentioned, has increased. And now with the possibility of the Black Sea Grain Initiative not continuing, this compounds everything. The market, the food prices go up. Of course, we need fertilizer to come out. It's made the world a very dangerous place with regards to food security. So we're asking everybody in the world to please take a look at this and please support us, because people are going to starve to death if we don't.
Even in a wealthy country like the UK, people are really struggling with the cost of basics. Can you see a time, Cindy, when food prices around the world might come down?
Well, certainly, if the Ukrainian situation levels out and the conflict stops, is one way to help the prices come down. And also, you know, other regions being able to produce differently or produce more of what they're doing. But most importantly, the thing is that we have to make sure that we as a world work together to make sure that people can be fed.
But here there's been some evidence of companies, big companies, making profits more than they really require. Have you seen evidence of profiteering?
I have not witnessed that. I'm happy to say I've not witnessed that. But I do understand the urgency, and I do understand the people in the UK. The food insecurity is hitting them personally, because they can't find the things in the markets that they used to find, or if they do find them, the price is doubled from what it was. So this is all a result of a cascading effect that has occurred. Not only with Ukraine, but around the world, climate change again, cost, of course, and of course, conflict.
Do you think we might have to just get used to not eating some kind of foods because of climate change?
Oh gosh, it depends on the region. You know, I mean, I know I've heard that there's a shortage of fruits and vegetables around the world, lettuce especially, as you mentioned, milk. Because of the prices and because of the lack of fertilizer, we're going to see crop yields that are planted probably not yielding as much as they did last year because of the fertilizer issue.
But maybe some of the answers are more radical. Some people suggest we should eat insects rather than meat. Should we be open to that?
I think we should be open to everything. I really do. I think things are going to change a little bit, and I think food waste has to be considered in this as well, because food waste is an enormous problem globally.
Do you think Ukrainian farmers will be able to bring a harvest in this year?
I think it's going to be difficult. I know that there are some farms that are still operating, but you have to remember a large majority of the land, where the crops were grown before, are now mined. The equipment with landmines, the equipment that they use to work the farms are mined. This is a tragic situation, and if the conflict were to end today, we'd be years being able to clear the land and clear the properties to make sure that it was safe to plant and safe to put livestock on.
What about Moscow renewing the grain deal? Now, that's been a vital way of making sure supplies people desperately need still get out of Ukraine. Must Russia renew it?
Yes, they must renew the deal. We can't, possibly be able to feed the region, let alone the world, unless they do. As you know, Ukraine used to be pretty much the breadbasket of Europe, and now that's not happening. And we need to get the grain out because it's affecting other countries. And now what we're doing at WP is sourcing our grains that we give out from other sources, other possibilities, other availabilities around the world. But the cost has gone up. So we are not able to feed as many people as we could because of the cost.
And what would you say to other world leaders to help make that happen? And what are the consequences if it doesn't?
Every world leader should take a look at this. This is something that we need to stop so that we can go back to being able to feed people, and people making sure that they're secure and they have their not only their food, their water, but their families are fed and they're able to feed themselves. So yes, every world leader should take a look at this and help us, help end the conflict.
I mean, Thomasina, Cindy McCain paints quite a bleak picture there of the lack of security in our food chains. Do you agree with her?
Yeah, entirely. I mean, our food system just generally isn't working. And she mentioned a few things. She mentioned the cost of nitrates. Well, if the government had a more joined up approach about investing in agri-tech like they are in the US and Israel, then we would see the cost of nitrates absolutely dropping for farmers because they wouldn't need to use so much, and investing in things like regenerative farming. But she also talked about the profiteering of big food companies. Now, the major category that they are profiteering from, the fastest growing category, is ultra-processed foods. Now, we know lots of studies have pointed to those causing cancers, weight gain, cardiovascular disease, all sorts of things, and premature death. That's costing the economy, diet-related disease, about £54 billion, equivalent to how much we spend on education. If we could look at ultra-processed foods as that commerciogenic thing, like smoking, like the marketing, they're addictive stuff, these foods.
But you mentioned profiteering there, which is interesting because we've talked about it a bit in the last few months here. From your knowledge of the food industry, you sound like you're convinced it is happening.
Well, let's look at it. When Boris Johnson came up with some really good ideas coming out of the food report that Henry Dimbleby did, one of it was including banning the marketing of these foods, which we know to be addictive. We know, and there needs to be way more studies done on how they affect ill health. But then that was suddenly, there was a U-turn overnight. Money is taken between food companies to scientists, to doctors, to ministers. So we need to stop those links between the food industry, just like we did with the smoking and the tobacco industry.
Okay, Pippa, is this though one of these problems of food inflation that actually governments right around the world are a bit banjos? There's not really that much they can do.
Well, it's not just us, obviously, as we know, and there are international factors at play in terms of driving up inflation. I mean, all economies were under pressure coming out of the pandemic, and then obviously with the Ukraine crisis, there was a sort of knock-on in terms of energy prices and inflation here. And we've seen some countries, like France, talking about putting a cap on food prices. I think it'd be very difficult to see that happening here right now. I think we're much more likely for the government to want to see whether the supermarket suggestions and the industry suggestions that prices are going to start coming down do happen before they make any decision. But ultimately, people are really struggling with cost of living still, despite all that government support that's gone in on energy prices in particular. And I think ultimately, underneath it all, people there's a lack of resilience in household budgets off the back of 10 years of austerity. And I think it's going to take quite some substantial falls in things like food prices for people to feel that they actually have money in their pockets again.
Okay, all three of you, thank you for now. But at the end of the programme, Thomasina, I want to know if you've got any recipes for insects. A challenge to you there. Now, yesterday, Keir Starmer, after his success in the council elections we talked about last week, made a pretty dramatic sounding promise that his changes to the party, compared to Tony Blair's, would be on steroids.
With the levels of cynicism in our politics, the letdown, the drifting away, the disconnect, our collapse in Scotland, the loss of the Red Wall, this task is going to be ongoing, difficult, and enormous. it is, if you like, clause 4 on steroids.
Blair on steroids. Well, what does that really mean? Let's ask one of Keir Starmer's team, the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who's with us this morning. Good morning. What does that mean? Clause 4 on steroids, and clause 4 for the non-political nerds was when Labour dropped its commitment to nationalising everything. So what does he mean now?
It means that if you look at the scale of the challenge any incoming Labour government would have, it is, I would argue, bigger than any other point in British history. We've had an economy that hasn't performed as it should have for 13 years. We've got public services where, look, let's be frank, are there any public services today working better than 13 years ago when the Conservatives came to power? No. And so the scale of what we've got to do is not only have the policy platform that meets that, but have the courage to change the Labour Party to meet that. That is what Clause 4 fundamentally was about. I think that is what Keir has done so far. We know there's more to do, but Keir is making clear, yes, we see the challenge is very big, but don't underestimate our determination to meet that challenge.
Would the challenges really be bigger than at any time in British history, as you said, bigger than after World War II?
Well, if you look at the challenges, yes, I'm not saying they're not significant, okay, but look at the state of the public realm, look at the state of the economy, look at the challenges that come from an ageing population, technological disruption. We saw the AI feature you've just done. These are very significant issues, and also they've come at a time where the rest of the world is absolutely hungry for the jobs of the future, the investments we're seeing in the US through the Inflation Reduction Act. Our policy platform is the equivalent to that. It's that level of ambition. And we don't see that from the government. And I listen to government ministers, and all I hear is, look, we're going to do more of the same, more of what we've done for the last 13 years, and it hasn't worked.
But it's interesting because Labour backers, or some of our viewers this morning who might be wondering about backing Labour, will also want to know that Keir Starmer is someone who they can really trust. And when he won the leadership, he said he'd make the case for moral socialism. Yesterday, he said, I don't care if I sound like a Conservative. Now, what are people meant to make of that? That sounds like someone who'll say almost anything in order to be elected.
His reference. What Keir was asking is, what is it the Conservative Party actually conserves? Because it's not the NHS, it's not the BBC, it's not our waterways full of filthy sewage, it's not the nation, it's not family life. And he was pointing out that to meet the things, to celebrate the things, to defend the things that make this country great, it's the Labour agenda that will do that. And on Keir personally, I voted for Keir Starmer. I wanted someone who could be the Prime Minister and do it for the right reasons, be in public service for the right reasons. And he embodies that, and that hasn't changed. And I think simply taking, yes, the statement and values he had in that leadership contest, but recognising we've had things like the pandemic and that it's affected how much money there is to spend on public services. That sensible approach to his ambitions should be celebrated. We've got to recognise the environment we're in.
But do you accept then that he has, as you might put it, been on a bit of a journey? I'm not saying if that's right or wrong, but he has moved.
No, I don't. I think that Keir Starmer, I voted for in the leadership contest, has fulfilled everything I wanted to see from him, whether I was in his team or not, but simply to recognise that there'll be limitations, of course, on any incoming Labour government. There'll be limited funds, there'll be priorities we have to make. Of course, that is what he's got to do as we approach the election, as we approach the manifesto that we will put forward. But I think it is absolutely the same Keir Starmer that I supported, and I celebrate that.
But as a Labour politician, would you care if someone said, oh, you know what, listening to him on a Sunday morning, he sounds a bit like a Tory?
I think it is incumbent on any political party that's had a defeat as significant as 2019 to look at itself and say, we're going to have to attract some voters back who didn't vote for us last time. And I want people who voted Conservative last time to look again at the Labour Party, look at their own priorities and say, actually, yes, it is Labour who better represent that. That doesn't mean we're not embodying what I think is a classic Labour offer. I think that is fundamentally what Keir Starmer is about: a stronger set of employment rights, a better industrial policy, making the economy work for working people, rebuilding the NHS, opportunity for all. He's been clear on his ambitions, but we, of course, want to attract as wide a coalition of support for that as possible.
Now, you mentioned there flexible working and industrial relations. Now, the government is already passing laws that it says will make flexible working more easily. What would you actually do differently?
Well, look, there's been some speculation about Labour's policies. I should say what you've seen in the papers is not the final policy statements we'll make at the manifesto. It's part of our process. It's what we've got to deliberate on. There'll be amendments that will go on and do it. But I look at our economy today, and I want not just jobs for people, I want good jobs you can build a family life around, where you can own your own home, where you can go on holiday, you can have a car now and again, but fundamentally you can see your own children, have some family life. And I think recently, over the last few years, that balance hasn't been struck correctly. So what we propose...
flexible working be the default from day one?
I think we are moving in a direction where for some jobs, not for all jobs, it's not possible for every job in the economy, the tightness of the labour market, that is what workers themselves are demanding. Now, there are different approaches as to whether you have a mandatory approach or you have incentives to do that. But I think a degree of flexibility to support family life is what a lot of working people expect.
But can you say to bosses that you won't tell them what to do? Because you said there could be a mandatory approach there. Are you going to tell bosses they have to offer flexible working?
Look, to address the very serious economic problems this country has means working in partnership with business. So I don't want to preach to businesses. I don't want to tell them what should be, specifically applies to their workplace. But we will work with them. And I do think people look at things at the minute and say, look, you need jobs that you can have a life around. And I think the best employers recognise that. They use that to attract talent. We'll work with them to support that agenda.
Let's talk about something else that is mooted as being on your agenda for the next general election. Can you confirm that Labour has plans for giving EU citizens who've settled here the right to vote at general elections?
Oh, again, the speculation on this is not our final policy position. This is part of our manifesto process. We do want to strengthen our democracy. We believe if people make a contribution to this country, if they live here, there's an argument for having them involved in that process. But we will set that out in detail. As I say, this is part of how we make policy. It's a democratic process involving the whole breadth of the Labour movement. But if people are making a contribution to the UK, let's celebrate that.
So it sounds very clearly that you think that should be the case.
No, I'm not saying we're going to get to that point yet. There'll be different ways, different specific measures to do that. But I think we've seen from this government actually measures to try and discourage people participating in the democracy we have. We want to do the opposite and encourage more people to be involved.
And is it possible you would also consider extending that right as part of your process, deliberating what to do, to all migrants who've settled here, not just EU citizens?
Well, look, that's a specific question and we'll have to go through the process to do it. But as I say, it's about strengthening democracy and it's about involving as many people as possible. There are our ambitions. We'll get to the detail of that in the manifesto.
OK, just in our closing minutes, I want to ask you about something else that's happened in the Labour Party this week. And it happens from time to time in Westminster, and all parties, I think, have struggled to deal with these things. But this week there's been a shadow frontbencher who's been accused of sexual assault by another Labour MP. Now, should they be suspended while an investigation takes place?
Well, look, there's always more to do on this. We have changed our procedures in the Labour Party. There's an independent process now. It's free of any kind of political interference or any political factors that are as part of that. Now, I don't know the specifics of this case, so I can't comment on them particularly. But usually, where a complaint were to be made, there would be a process of a suspension while that investigation was taking place. But because it's independent, I wouldn't know the details of that.
But your view generally is that that should happen?
Where a complaint has been made, you would usually expect this independent process then to action that. You wouldn't know, as I say, as a frontbencher, what was being involved there, but it would usually involve a temporary suspension. OK,
well, Johnny Reynolds, always great to have you with us in the studio on a Sunday. Thanks very much indeed for coming in and taking questions on such a range of subjects. Thank you very much indeed. Now, time has zoomed by as ever. It's nearly 10 o'clock. And we started this morning by asking how long would the tricky times for the economy last? Here's what the Energy Secretary, Grant Shapps, had to say.
First of all, we're still absolutely committed to that set of 5 pledges. As you say, we want to halve inflation, and you're right that the bank have indicated that this is happening a bit slower than they would have liked. They're responsible for interest rates, but they're still saying it's going to happen. We want to grow the economy, and actually, against what the bank and the Office of Budget Responsibility had said, we thought we'd be into a shallow recession. In fact, the economy is growing, albeit slowly.
And my trio of experts at the desk is still with me. Thomasina, Miers, Craig Jackson from Octopus Energy, and Pippa Crear, the political editor of The Guardian. Pippa, there clearly have been nerves in and around government this week. But do you think there's something serious? Is this the start of something serious unfolding for Rishi Sunak, do you think?
I don't think it's the start. I think it's a continuation, and we've just had an opportunity for it to bubble into public this week because we had the local elections and the poor results and a couple of internal rows within the Conservative Party. But from the off, he's had a really sort of uphill struggle, not least because of the state of the party when he took it over post Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and all the dramas there, but also because of the state, and more fundamentally because of the state of the economy. And that's what it all comes down to ultimately. The cost of living, the crisis that people have been struggling with. If the Conservatives can manage to get on top of inflation, if they can manage to handle the economy in such a way that people feel that they're slightly better off at the beginning of this, at the end of this government than they were at the beginning, then they have a chance at the next election. But that looks really tough to do given the broader picture. And the fact that Rishi Sunak doesn't have the direct mandate of Conservative Party members makes that even harder to try and get his team on board. And I've been very struck over the last few days talking to Tory MPs how despondent they are really about their chances running up to the next election, and critically how they don't have the fire of rebellion in their bellies. They think they're going to limp on into the election, and many of them think it's going to be a fait accompli.
Yeah, well, somebody a former minister described it to me as a sort of depressive apathy, really. There wasn't very much they could do about it, but let's see. There was no despondency, of course, in Liverpool last night. And at the beginning of the programme, I promised you that we would hear from our own special reporter who was there behind the scenes. Yes, Catherine Tate. 12 points all round. Here's her report.
I've just given the scores for the UK to Sweden. Look at this. This is absolutely incredible. The atmosphere is fantastic, and we're just waiting to hear who wins. This is what you need to know about the Eurovision. It was absolutely phenomenal. What went on backstage was like a ballet, because the crew were incredible. Every act was phenomenal. All the presenters were absolutely tremendous. This man's been waiting
desperate.
He's been waiting for a photo.
Who's this?
This is Laura Kuenssberg. Sunday with Laura
Kuenssberg.
For
I know
tomorrow.
her. She's Sky Sports.
No.
Can you take a picture? We're Sporting Sweden.
I'll bet you. Las Vegas.
You are so famous in Sweden, you don't know.
I don't know.
Honestly, you don't know.
I don't know that I was famous in Sweden. Sweden is finding out if they've won. And if they get more than 168 points, they've won.
200!
Yes, Sweden has won! Sweden! I've loved being your correspondent. Happy Sunday, everyone.
The glorious chaos of Eurovision and the glorious chaos of Catherine Tate. I think she's got a big future in showbiz reporting, and hopefully she's coming to the studio soon. Thomasina, I have to ask you, where are you watching Eurovision?
Little tiny snippets, amongst other things. So, yeah, a little bit.
And did you like what you saw?
I mean, music, food, it's the stuff of life. It's what we should all be doing more of. And dancing and eating.
Greg, did you catch any of it?
Well, actually, my partner's a Scouse and was partying on the streets of Liverpool last night. I got my own special reports on WhatsApp, and the atmosphere looked incredible. I think it certainly is a party city.
And Pippa, what about you? Were you watching yesterday?
We were. We had about 8 children in the house, all crowded around the telly, so it was pretty chaotic at our place. But I managed to catch some of it. It was great fun.
And do you think, I mean, it might sound a bit pompous in a way, but there's been a lot of chat and sort of wise commentary in the last few days saying actually Eurovision might be something that's very good for the morale of the country. Everyone's had a hard time. What do you reckon?
Well, anything which gives us a bit of hope and light and joy in the middle of some of the bleakness we're currently going through, I think is a good thing. And from a personal perspective, somebody spent far too long on Twitter. Going through scrolling through Twitter last night and have it all be about outfits and songs and some of the funny humour and the memes and everything. So much better than my normal sort of like doom scrolling through the political
backstabbing
landscape.
and intrigue. And Thomasina, finally to you, can you give us a recipe for insects?
Well, we used to have in the restaurants a delicious cricket flour chocolate brownie. So I would suggest at home, if you want to eat more vegetarian, you could throw some cricket flour into your tortillas, make some flatbreads. Then, I mean, delicious, extra protein.
Oh my goodness. Well, maybe there's a challenge to all of us for today. Find cricket flour somewhere and get in the kitchen. All of you, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thomasina, Greg and Pippa. Thank you so much to all of our other guests as well. We've all, well, most of us perhaps, enjoyed the songs, sequins and screaming crowds of Eurovision. But when it comes to the country making a living, the picture is a lot less fun. Politicians might not really want to admit it, but the way the economy is looking, things might still feel testing for some time to come. Of course, that's in part about the hangover from the pandemic and the cost of the war in Ukraine. But most MPs will tell you privately, at least, for a long time, the UK has struggled to find a good recipe for growth. And whatever side you were on, the disruption and dramas around the Brexit process, of course, didn't help. So the contest for your vote next time will be in large part about who can get the economy to turn a convincing corner. Grant Shapps sounded relatively confident that the government will achieve this. Relatively. So you can catch up with anything you missed, of course, on iPlayer later, especially that interview with Emad Mostaque. I would highly recommend watching that closely. But thanks for your company, and I'll look forward to seeing you back here, same time, same place, next week.
Hello everyone, I'm Matt, I'm an alcoholic addict. I'm terrified of relapsing.